Hello, everybody. This is Mr. Trio, and today we are talking about paper number 2, Breadth Studies, or Section B. And this video focuses on tackling the A-type question. The way that this is usually phrased is explain 2 ways in which things were similar or different. As a reminder, this particular video is designed for any of the sections that you may be studying. So many of you are studying B2, Changes in Medicine, or B3, Japan in Transformation. It doesn't matter. This is a general video that addresses the topic as a whole. Here's the marking scheme directly from the curriculum guide. I want to note that there are essentially 2 things which are being evaluated in this type of question. Target A01, which is demonstrate knowledge and understanding, and A02, which is explain, analyze, make judgments about historical events, period study using second-order historical concepts. Wow. The main thing that I hope to draw to your attention is that this is a 6-mark question, but notice the split. It's not 3 and 3. They put a stronger emphasis on the explain, analyze, and make judgments. So what that means is your knowledge and understanding of the period is important. But what is even more important is your ability to essentially make a greater judgment or how to analyze the material in order to show why these similarities or why these differences are important. I've always liked Mustangs, so I have this photograph of 2 Mustangs, the early 1964 and a modern one. I think that you would both recognize these as Mustangs made by the Ford Motor Company. However, at the heart of this question, hopefully one of the things that you can see is that they are very different from one another. And essentially, this is what the question is asking. Can you look at these 2 cars and see their differences? But the question could also be, how are they similar? As a reminder, the way that the question is structured is that it can ask you whether it is similar or different, but it would never ask you to provide both. So you would have to be consistent in your answer. When we looked at the marking scheme, we essentially talked about second-order concepts, which were that analysis. For a question that says, explain 2 ways in which the topic is different from one date to another, more than likely you're going to be using that change second-order concept in order to show the difference. However, if you are looking at a similarity, then you would be using the continuity second-order concept. So this is something that you can think about as you apply this to your analysis. There are a few things that I want to make clear about this particular question is that you have to be very mindful of the date range that they provide. These are 3 computers made by Apple, and as you can see, the early Apple II Plus, which I sadly admit that I had owned back in the 1980s, that is very different from the first iMac, which is in that beautiful turquoise color. If you were being asked, for example, about Apple computers, I mean, I understand that you wouldn't because that's not a topic, but if you were, if it was talking about the iMac of the early 1990s, you got to talk about that turquoise one. Or if it was about the 80s, you have to use the tan one, which is on the far right. The date range is very important, and more than likely, if they are putting a date into that question, there is something significant that happened at that time. So just be mindful that even if your information is correct, but it is outside the date range, then you won't get credit for this particular answer. If you were studying the B6 topic, which is the changing nature of warfare, and the question was about how wars, guerrilla wars in Vietnam in the 1960s was similar to guerrilla war in Afghanistan in the 1970s, then you have to be specific about what was happening in Vietnam and what was happening in Afghanistan. So I came up with a fun sample question that we could look at. This is just my own question, but essentially it's based on how questions are always structured. I don't believe there is any topic in the IGCSE studies for automobiles, but I thought it might be fun to look at. So the question could say, explain 2 ways in which automobiles in 1920 were different from automobiles in 1950. And one of the things that you have to do is think about all the different types of topics that could come up. The first one I thought of was safety. Automobiles were definitely much safer in the 1950s. And in particular, I thought about glass. This is just something that I happen to know about. So what I would essentially do is I would form my first paragraph and focus on a specific topic. In this particular case, glass. In 1920, automobiles were manufactured with a windscreen made with conventional glass. But in 1950, all automobiles were required to have safety glass, which is glass with a protective coating made of PVB. All right, that demonstrates my knowledge and understanding. Remember, that is 2 marks out of the 6. The 4 is about the analysis. So why is this change important? This is where you put in your deeper understanding. And notice I'm using my second order concept. This was an important change because prior to the upgrade, many people had been killed, I can't even read my own sentence, injured or killed in simple accidents being impaled with glass. Safety glass does not shatter, and thus it does not pose as large a risk to passengers. Notice how I'm coupling the knowledge and the analysis together, and I'm using that second order concept, change, in order to show difference. Now, just so you don't think that I'm just doing a halfway job, you have to do 2 ways. So here's the second comparison. You can pause if you want to read the whole sentence. But essentially, my second comparison is about how the manufacturing numbers of automobiles increased from 1920 to 1950 during that 30-year period. And once again, what I'm trying to do is use a second order concept in order to show a greater meaning. This particular time, I used the second order concept significant in order to just mix it up a little bit. Notice, this was significant because the large numbers in manufacturing made cars far more affordable. And then I tie that to the growth of suburbs. People who had cars could live further away from where they worked. So here is an interesting side-by-side that I'd like you to take a look at. In the example on the left, we have the example that I just did. But on the example on the right, notice how I coupled essentially the same material and divided it with the content and the analysis in 2 separate paragraphs. Which one of these do you think is a better example? Perhaps this is an easy explanation. But essentially, the one on the left is the way that you should structure this response. And there are several reasons. The first is that in the example on the left-hand side, you are specifically cross-referencing. First, you talk about glass in 1920, then you talk about glass in 1950. And then directly under that, you have your analysis about glass. And in order to have your two examples shine on their own and to, make it as clear as possible, that's where you put your manufacturer numbers in a separate paragraph. The biggest problem, of course, with trying to put everything together is that if you put all the 1920 information together and then all the 1950, you don't have that easy reference to your analysis in the same way that you do if you put it together. Thank you for joining me on this video. Once again, go back and pause if you want to read the response in whole. Don't forget that there are great examples available through the Pearson website, and you can download the sample assessment materials if you want to look at samples from all the different topics available through paper number 2, section B.